Hi guys, this is Miss Ginter with your ELA 10. So I decided this year that we are going to be reading the story Night by Elie Wiesel. I had to read this in junior high, but I think that it is still a great work that we can use in our English class. So you guys are going to be assigned to listen to this recording or this lecture during class. So I really encourage you to take those notes that I will probably have assigned to you. It is imperative, that means very crucial or important, that you take notes during this because you are going to see this material again. And if you don't understand the basics or the very basic terms, it's going to be really difficult as we read the novel. So your cultural literacy or your vocabulary words for this week have some of those basic terms in there. And I'm going to be highlighting a few of them in this PowerPoint as well. Feel free to pause this video at any time so that you can take the notes, and then just feel free to continue listening to it. So this is Elie Wiesel's Night and Mass Genocide, before, during, and after the Holocaust. A lot of this information is presented from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and we'll be using that website throughout our reading of Night. So we have the story of Elie Wiesel. So Elie Wiesel is the author who lived through the Holocaust, and he actually swore that he would never write about it. It wasn't until 1956 that his friend Marika persuaded him to record the events. And so his family was actually of Hungarian Jewish heritage. He was born on 9/30/1928, and until 2016, when he passed away, he was a Jewish writer, professor, political activist, Nobel Prize winner, and the author of 57 books, best known for Night. He also was a Holocaust survivor. This is just a picture of him before his deportation. I want you to take a good look at what he looked like before he went through the Holocaust. When people have to go through traumatic events, especially things like that, it's detrimentally going to impact not only his physical state, but his mental, emotional, social, spiritual well-being. To give you a little overview of Night that we're going to be reading, it won't take us too long to read it. It's a pretty short novel. It begins in Szeged, Transylvania. During the early years of World War II, Szeged remained relatively unaffected by the war, so they didn't really have a lot of impact from it. So the Jews in this area believed that they would be safe from the persecution that Jews in Germany and Poland suffered. So even though the persecution was around them, they didn't really think that it was going to come to where they were. Night is a sparse and fragmented narrative style with frequent shifts in point of view. This is called the ghetto speaker, and the story recounts Wiesel's loss of faith in God and man's goodness. As you'll quickly learn when we do some discussions in class and activities with faith in relation to Night, it is an extremely sad story of a man who is very strong in the faith, and he ultimately loses that faith and loses man's ability to see good because of the Holocaust. It can kind of be seen as the opposite of Anne Frank that you guys probably read in earlier years, where she really believed that people were still good at heart. Wiesel is kind of like, nope, I am done with God, I'm done with people, and this world is horrible. This map is just an area of the areas that I was just talking about. So you can see remote Romania. You can also see all the different little areas that are going to play a major role in our novel as we continue. Again, this is just another map of surrounding areas. Primarily, these ones are going to play the largest role with Germany, Austria, Hungary, Romania. The story of Night's genre is a novel, a memoir, and a historical narrative. We just finished up writing your own memoirs, so this is a really great example of someone who wrote an entire memoir themselves. It's part of a trilogy. Dawn and Day are the following books in the series. I have not read those, but I have heard that they are very insightful for learning more about the Holocaust. An autobiography is a sketch of the author's entire life, often written from birth up until the time of the writing. This story, Night, is a memoir because it focuses on one aspect of his life. They usually cover a short span of time, and their main purpose is to draw the reader's attention to a specific theme or circumstance. And when I say like short span, the Holocaust lasted numerous years, but that was still short in comparison to how many years that person lived. So if you go through a hardship or trial for, 5 to 7 years, that's relatively short compared to a person that lives to be 80, 90, 100. Other types of nonfiction include a biography, essay, speech. A biography is a story of life from another person's perspective, so you yourself would not be writing it about yourself. An essay is a short nonfiction work that addresses a specific subject, and a speech is a talk or an address presented to an audience. Before the war, Jews were living in every country in Europe before the Nazis came into power in 1933. There were approximately 9 million Jews. Poland and the Soviet Union had the largest populations. Jews could be found in all walks of life. They were normal people. They were farmers, factory workers, business people, doctors, teachers, craftsmen, you name it. They were just like everybody else. There was inherently nothing different that you could, look at a person and determine, oh, they're different than me. Like, you were not able to do that. This is just a group portrait of members of the Jewish community of Saget in front of their synagogue. So, like I said, they were Jewish descent and very dedicated to the faith. During the war, we're going to really cover something heavily called anti-Semitism. In 1944, Elie Wiesel and all the other Jews in town were rounded up in cattle cars. They were deported to concentration camps in Poland. They were then sent to Auschwitz. And so when I say deported in cattle cars, if you guys know what cattle cars look like, legitimately, that's what they use to transfer cattle. In the story, they talk about where they put hundreds of them in cattle cars. A, that tells you how thin and malnourished they were. B, that tells you how mistreated they were. At the beginning, they didn't, I know that they knew that something was wrong, but I do not believe that Elie Wiesel nor all these other Jews realized what was about to happen to them. So while they were in Auschwitz, that's one of the first places they went. Anti-Semitism was the biggest systematic belief, and that was the treatment, meaning the hate of the Jews. Today, Jews have now faced prejudice and discrimination for over 2,000 years. Jews were scapegoats for many problems. For example, people blame Jews for the Black Death that killed thousands in Europe during the Middle Ages. A scapegoat is someone that is blamed for something that has nothing to do with them. We're actually going to read a story probably later in the year about the Black Death, and so you guys will understand that. But feel free to research any of these terms further or ask your history teacher for more information or myself. And I'd be happy to give you more information. But again, this is just a brief overview so you can understand the novel in English class. So Nazi teachers began to apply the principles of racial science by measuring the skull size and nose length and recording students' eye color and hair to determine whether students belong to this Aryan race. This was a perfection concept by Adolf Hitler that included blonde hair, blue eyes, and a Stahltacher. And he did not present any of those qualities necessarily himself, but that was his standard of moral perfection. So starting the war in 1938, Germany began invading its neighboring countries. And so when Germany attacked Poland on September 1st, 1939, Britain and France joined forces to fight against Germany, and World War II began. Immediately, Jews were forced out of their homes and moved into ghettos. Ghettos were usually established in the poor sections of a city. where most of the Jews from the city and surrounding areas were forced to reside. They were surrounded by barbed wire or walls, and they were sealed. These ghettos had characteristics of being overcrowded, malnourishment or malnutrition, and heavy labor. And so eventually, almost all Jews were dissolved and murdered. And when I say dissolved, I mean that the ghettos and the people. This is just a picture example of that. You guys, if you know anything about the war, or you know anything about the Holocaust, you have probably seen this picture of the swastika. So we can see that as a symbol of Nazi Germany. The Nazi Party took the swastika, an ancient symbol, and they actually turned it up on a leg so that it looked like it was rolling. It was supposed to symbolize progress and movement forward to a better world. In order to control a country completely, you have to control what people think. And so the Nazis actually found books to be very dangerous. They believed that if people had power through knowledge, that was detrimental to them. And so they actually burned many of those books. This swastika picture represents the leg that was rolling. That's why if you look at the symbol, it looks like it's always moving. During the war, and I told you to pay attention to the picture of Elie Wiesel at the beginning, former prisoners at the little camp in Buchenwald stare out from the wooden bunks in which they slept 3 to what they would call a bed. That is not a bed. It's literally a wood shaft. Elie Wiesel is pictured in the second row of bunks, 7th from the left, next to this man that's standing up. So he's right here. This is a picture of him. You can't really see his body, but this is representative of, I would say, 99% of these people. You can also see that here in the man that has his rib cage clearly showing because of how thin and malnourished they were. So during the war, between 1933 and 1945, the German government was led by Adolf Hitler, and the Nazi Party carried out this systematic persecution and murder of Europe's Jews. But as we will quickly learn, it was not just Jews that were persecuted. This genocide is now what's known as the Holocaust. Genocide is the mass killings of people based on ethnicity, nation, race, or religion. The Nazi regime has also persecuted and killed millions of other people it considered politically, racially, or socially unfit. The term Holocaust is used to describe the genocide of approximately 6 million European Jews during World War II. Concentration camps were the largest means to carry out genocide. 3 million died just in these camps. Though Jews were the largest target, so were mentally ill, gypsies, that means they were from Roma as an area, handicapped, Jehovah's Witness, Polish, political descendants, and same-sex people, so homosexual men primarily. They were later identified by shapes, stars, triangles, and IDs. If you've, like I said, read Anne Frank or relatively know little about the Holocaust, you will recognize like the yellow star, or numbers or IDs carved into or tattooed into arms, or different areas represented these different targets, as they would say, that they felt not necessarily as a threat, but they just felt that they did not match up to that perfect race. The Allies' victory ended World War II, but Nazi Germany and its collaborators kind of had that impact and continued to shatter countless lives that they didn't really care about. By definition, the Holocaust is a sacrifice consumed by fire. It's a thorough destruction. It is the mass slaughter of European civilians, especially Jews, by the Nazis during World War II, usually with the mass slaughter of people, especially genocide. And if you were to just translate that word, it just means complete destruction by fire. In a nutshell, this Nazi plan included 3 steps. We have expulsion, containment, and final solution. Expulsion, so if we want to expel something, we want to get everybody out. So they want to get all the Jews out of Germany. Containment, we want to put them all together. We want to contain them in one place, and they did that in the ghettos. The final solution was the annihilation or mass extermination. That means killing. Persecution, most of the gas chambers used carbon monoxide from diesel engines. In Auschwitz and the other camps, Xylon B pellets were highly poisonous insecticide, and that supplied the gas. And so after the gassings, the prisoners removed hair, gold teeth, and fillings from the Jews before the bodies were burned in the crematory or were buried in mass graves. And so, you know, when I explain that, that's just one form of the killing that was primarily used. So basically, they would act like they were taking them to showers, and they would go in, they would gas them with one of these poisonous insecticides or fuel from diesel engines, and that would receive such a high enough amount they would die. And then the people in charge of them would basically remove their hair, so rip it out, rip their teeth out, any gold, any fillings, that they could make money off of these people. They did not receive any proper burial. They literally just threw them into the flames and the fire, or threw them on top of other dead bodies. It's very, very morbid. Extermination camps. By 1942, the murder of Jews became more and more organized. Hitler encouraged his officers to speed up the process. So these SS commanders had experimented with different methods. Like I said, gas chambers were the favorite. The first extermination camp began in 1942, and although multiple died, thousands, from disease or overwork or starvation, there were only 7 official extermination camps known as death camps or concentration camps. Again, there were only 7 concentration camps. These camps existed purely for the purpose of killing. Most prisoners taken there were dead within hours. A small number of prisoners considered healthy were temporarily forced to work. They were underfed and overworked until basically they weren't able to work anymore, and then they were killed. Again, you can start to see this in the photos that are listed. These are all real live photos from these events. So how did all of this begin? That's a really big question that I get when I teach this, is how the heck did Adolf Hitler, who's just one person, convince an entire area to just kill all of these people who did nothing inherently wrong? At the end of World War I, Germany was economically devastated. So the Treaty of Versailles unfairly placed all the blame for the war on Germany, and that gave away a lot of German land and demanded heavy payments. This treaty humiliated the German people. They were very upset and blocked the nation's efforts to rebuild itself and move forward economically and technologically. In the late 20s and early 30s, the worldwide Great Depression made things even more difficult. We will talk about the Great Depression when we read To Kill a Mockingbird, but that plays a huge role in how this all began. So that's the precursor. The rise of the Nazi Party is the biggest concept of why Hitler was so successful. And there he is in, I don't even know what to call him, but not a nice person, in all his glory, acting like he's this big, great ruler. So as resentment and desperation grew in Germany, radical political parties became more popular. Among the more extreme activists was Adolf Hitler, who had joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party, that was just known as the Nazi Party, in 1920, and had increased membership in large part through the power of his public speaking. So I want you to think that during the same time, the 1920s, 1930s, that the Great Depression's happening, this Holocaust is starting in Germany. So it says by the time of the Depression in Germany, Hitler's party had more than 100,000 members and was growing rapidly. It began participating in elections with growing success. By 1933, he pressured the president, Paul von Hindenburg into appointing him as chancellor, the head of the government. And as chancellor, that's really what started his walk to, power or fame that he did develop. The Nazi assault is what I would call was happening previously. On the previous slide, it said 1930s, 1933. So here we have by 1933 to 1939. In March 1933, Hitler addressed the first session of the German parliament following his appointment as chancellor. That led to something called fascism, a system of government with centralized authority under a dictator. Fascism is super important for you to remember. Basically, you were being led by one person, a dictator, and that is what Hitler became. After this photo was taken, all the political parties, except for the socialists and communists, passed the Enabling Act. That is ultimately the takeover of power. That is what led to Hitler having the power to rule by decree. By 1935, Germany no longer recognized the Treaty of Versailles or the restrictions that it had. So Hitler announced his intention to totally rebuild Germany's military, which broke the rules set by the treaty. Immediately following that, that's really where our terror begins. And so stormtrooper guards newly arrested members of the German Communist Party in a basement jail of the SA barracks in Berlin. These death camps, again, were called concentration camps. Communists, socialists, other political opponents of Nazis were among the first to be rounded up and imprisoned. This is when we read Night. You're going to see in the introduction chapters, or the first few chapters, that this is why Elie Wiesel wasn't really concerned at first. He saw this happening in all these other areas, but they thought, oh, this can't come to Transylvania. Like, that's not going to happen here. So they were just regular citizens, and immediately they became known as outcasts. This is a picture of a woman who reads a boycott sign posted on the window of a Jewish-owned department store. The Nazis initiated boycott of Jewish shops and businesses. They were just going to destroy and take anything that they could. It just basically says buy only at German shops. Many Germans continued to enter the Jewish stores despite the boycott. That was called off after 24 hours, but in the weeks and months that followed, more discriminatory or more heinous actions or measures were taken against the Jews. They were stripped of every power or right that they could have. It's really similar to when we talk about in the Great Depression and To Kill a Mockingbird that African Americans and white people were given different rights, that there were bathrooms you could use and food places and seats on the bus that you could sit in or couldn't. This is almost the exact same thing, but to a much, much higher violent and dictatorship degree. There was something called the Nazi race laws, and this was an instructional chart that distinguishes individuals with the pure German blood, this left column, mixed blood, second and third, and Jews, the right two columns, as defined in the Nuremberg laws. Among other things, the laws issued in September 1935 restricted future German citizenship to those of German or kindred blood. It excluded those deemed to be racially Jewish or Gypsy. The laws prohibited marriage and sexual relationships between Jews and non-Jews. Again, you can compare this completely to African Americans and white people. One really important event that you're going to see in Night is called the Night of Broken Glass, or the Kristallnacht. And residents of Germany were viewing a burning synagogue the morning after this. So on the night of November 9th and 10th, 1938, the Nazi regime unleashed orchestrated anti-Jewish violence across Greater Germany. Within 48 hours, synagogues were vandalized and burned. 7,500 Jewish businesses were damaged or destroyed. 96 Jews were killed, and nearly 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to the concentration camps. From 1939 to 1945, we have the faster process of the Holocaust called the Final Solution. The Final Solution was devised in 1941 to speed up the system of killing the Jews and undesirables, again, the gypsies, the homosexuals, the disabled. Previous methods of shooting and burying the dead. I know that your text says buying. I will need to change that. But previous methods of shooting and burying the dead became costly and ineffective. So before they had like the gas chambers and that kind of stuff, they would literally just shoot everybody. They just have them stand up in a line and fire rapid. So eventually, using a lot of ammo to them became expensive. And so that final method they switched to was the gas chambers and crematories presented in earlier slides. During the Final Solution, the term selection, again, the term is selection, was very important. That was used when SS officers would force prisoners to line up for an inspection when clearly they had been beaten and underfed, forced to run who knows how many hundreds of thousands of miles. And they're like, all right, we're going to line you up and see who's the fittest, who looks the best. It's really a mockery of their humility as people. And so they actually just decided, all right, you're going to live, you're going to die. And right there on the spot, they would kill them, or they would tell them that they could, live. Like, we're going to keep you, we're going to keep working you. Both situations had horrendous outcomes, either death or working until you died. These are some pictures of the deportations, or like the cattle cars that we talked about earlier. Between 1942 and 1944, trains carrying Jews from German-controlled Europe rolled into one of the 6 killing centers located along rail lines in occupied Poland. There were between, like I said, 80 and 100 people in the car. They usually carried 1,000 to 2,000 people. Now, this one's a little bigger than the cattle car, so that's why it says 1,000 to 2,000. Many died during the extreme conditions of the journey. Most survivors were murdered upon arrival. So even if they survived that journey, they got out and they were immediately killed. Within the concentration camp, the colored triangular badges identified the prisoners in categories. Like I said, based on the gender, the race, they separated men from women. They separated the Jews from the Polish or the homosexuals. And this identified them during roll call. This is a picture of them at Buchenwald concentration camp. And again, they used letters, numbers, and shapes. Jews in Vienna wait in line in this picture at a police station to obtain exit visas. Following the incorporation of Austria by Nazi Germany in March 1938, the unleashing of a wave of humiliation, terror, and confiscation, many Austrian Jews attempted to leave the country. Now, these are people that obviously were not already taken to concentration camps. They realized what was going on and were trying to get out or get help. Before being allowed to leave, however, Jews were required to get an exit visa, plus pay a large sum of money and taxes and fees. So this is why so many people were victims of the Holocaust, because they couldn't get out. America's response is another question that I get asked a lot in the Holocaust. What in the world was America doing while this, concentration camps and Holocaust is occurring? The government policies in the 1930s made it difficult for Jews seeking refuge to even settle in the U.S. Like I said, they had that large sum of money pressed upon them from the government that they just couldn't acquire. In May 1939, the passenger ship St. Louis, seen here, before departing Hamburg, sailed from Germany to Cuba, carrying 937 passengers, and most of them were Jews. Unknown to the passengers, though, the Cuban government had revoked their landing certificates, so all of their efforts went to nothing. After the war, Soviet soldiers were the first to liberate camp prisoners on July 23, 1944, in Poland. British, Canadian, American, and French troops also liberated prisoners. The troops were shocked, you can say devastated, at what they saw. The war in Europe ended with the unconditional surrender of Germany in May 1945. This is what the survivors looked like when the people finally rescued some of them. In our last chapter, the post-war trials were something that happened as a result of the Holocaust. Leading Nazi officials listened to proceedings at the International Military Tribunal, so the best known of the post-war trials in Nuremberg, Germany, before judges representing the Allied powers. Beginning in October 1945, 22 major war criminals were tried on charges of crimes against peace, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and conspiracy to commit such crimes. If you think about that, though, the number of 22 compared to what number I said at the beginning, millions of Jews that were killed, and not just Jews, but the Poles and the Romanians and the homosexuals, that the people that hurt all these other people, they never were punished for what they did. That's where Elie Wiesel really lost a lot of his faith, because he felt like, wow, like, where is God? Where is God in this situation? One of his best friends, who also survived the Holocaust, still believes in God, or still did before he passed away. And he always felt so heartbroken for Elie Wiesel, because his friend believed that, God did not, make this happen, that we live in a fallen world, and that's something that is just a horrible atrocity of the world. But Elie was so devoted to the faith that he couldn't believe where God was in the situation, that he would allow it to happen. That's going to be a huge discussion and materials that we cover later in class about, how you feel about that, how you would feel with that type of faith and what's happening around you. As you guys know, I'm a Christian. That's extremely difficult for me to even just process. And I love the Lord, but it is so hard to look at the world and see that those things are happening. And it definitely makes you have a lot of questions. I do not doubt my faith, but I know, and I can come from a place of understanding how Elie Wiesel would feel. I will not pretend to know how he feels, but I just really want you guys to put yourself in his shoes. Unfortunately, the genocide did not end with the Holocaust. And in response to the Holocaust, the international community worked to create safeguards to prevent any future genocides. The United Nations in 1948 voted to establish genocide as an international crime, calling it a scourge to be condemned by the civilized world. Despite this effort, you guys will not be surprised that genocide is continued and does continue to threaten parts of the world today. These pictures are refugees from 2003 to 2005 of genocide in Darfur, Sudan, above, struggling to survive after being displaced from villages. We know that discrimination, prejudice, racism still exists today. We hear things like feminism, Black Lives Matter, Africans Americans as opposed to white people, homosexuality, LGBTQ, all of those things face immense persecution. Jewish, Christianity, Catholicism, religion, race, gender, ethnicity faces persecution to this day. This is not a new event. This is a decades long persecution. So I want to leave you guys with a powerful quote. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. At the end of night, I want you to pay attention to how the Holocaust deeply impacted Wiesel. Like I said, Wiesel saw darkness and night as a symbol for a world without God. Night is always when the suffering is worst, and the presence of darkness reflects Eliezer's belief that his has become a world without the presence of God. I don't know about you guys, but I really don't like nighttime when it gets dark outside. especially if I'm alone. I don't sleep well, and my mind plays tricks on me of things that aren't there. So I want you to really think about the deeper meaning, those symbols, that symbolization, that figurative language and imagery that we're going to see in Night, that really Elie Wiesel, when he titled his book or his memoir Night, that darkness is all he saw for the multiple years that he lived through the Holocaust. The essential questions I would like you to consider since finishing this lecture and taking notes are: why do writers write about such atrocious things as the Holocaust? What is the purpose of reading literature about these events? Why is Ms. Ginter making you read this, for those of you that don't like reading? How do people justify awful things such as the genocide? And how did the Nazis justify the Holocaust? Again, this is Ms. Ginter with your English 10, and I hope that you guys have found this video not only helpful and informative, but feel free to ask me any questions, and you guys should take notes on this. You are going to have a quiz that you will see this information on again, so just make sure you take really good notes and you guys should be fine. If you have any questions, feel free to see me before or after class, and I would be more than happy to answer them for you. But yeah, I hope that that gives you a brief overview. Have a good day, guys.